Hello, everybody. Sorry about the poor camera quality. I think it's my old laptop. This is my diary, which I would like to do regularly, regarding communication ethics, which is my specialist subject since my last university studies. Communication ethics is an amazing subject. It applies to everybody. Everybody can use it. I always say from 5 years old upwards, because as part of my studies, I invented a technique or method, a logic, um, for breaking information into parts and making it easy to access, to classify, and to work with, so that complicated ideas, a lot of information and data which is badly constructed or hidden or distorted, is reimagined, repurposed to into something which everybody can use and organize for themselves and to better their common communication practice. If you haven't studied communication, and it's very easy to study, it's important because actually before 1946 there wasn't even one professor of communication. The first professor of communication was appointed in 1946, Wilbur Schramm, at the American University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And his appointment really starts at the same time as the computer revolution, or the discovery, invention of the transistor, and slightly later, 1948, the publication of a famous article called The Mathematical Theory of Communication by Claude Shannon. And together, these three innovations, changes, begin a study which really is human study of a civilization, of human being, which goes back to all human history. And before that, although there is no before humans, because we only understand things as humans. So communication ethics, but communication specifically, is a theory of individual and collective perception and organization, which gives us a language, a way of looking at the world that integrates and differentiates, that provides everyone with a technique, a means, a standpoint, actually, technically, to begin their change towards a better world, towards a better way of looking at the world, because communication brings us together. Consider a baby, consider an animal, because animals communicate like we do, although in different ways. They interact. And that's the basic definition of communication, is the study of interaction, of living interaction particularly, but also of non-living kinds, because the way we look at the world, the communicative framework, the language we use, the images, the behaviors, all the different perspectives which human beings adopt are encompassed and embraced by communication, not as a destructive project, but as a constructive project to make it more possible for us to comprehend the world, each and together. So communication is both about the individual and the group. It's also about organizational structures. Organization communication is a huge development in theory of organizations. And in fact, you hardly can understand an organization without seeing it as a communication network or as a communication framework. And the media, of course, is totally under the theoretical project of communication, although, of course, today in our mediated world, our digital age, it's so difficult to understand what is going on. If you're not confused, you probably aren't looking, because the media have produced the mediating technologies that we have produced. also produce vast sums of information which almost no one can understand. In fact, no one can, because the vastness is too great. The number of tweets, the number of posts, the number of blogs, the number of words, the number of channels, they're beyond calculation. I mean, you can make general calculations like 1 billion hours of video are uploaded each day. But how many hours can you watch? How many minutes? How many seconds? So communication in this vast mediated world we now inhabit, those of us in the digital age, is very, very complex. And that's why there is so much confusion, so much fake news, so much information distortion. And in fact, the wars being carried out around the world today are really information wars. They of course have a material quality, a material level where people are killing each other with machines and tools. But the real war, the legitimization of war, the discourse of war, the political function of war is to create perception about the circumstances on the ground. And really what we're going through is, in 2023, is a world turned upside down by information, a world in chaos because of information. Too much information, badly filtered information, poor quality information, and deliberately distorted information. My most unfavorite category, where there are groups of people who deliberately distort the information that's being put out. And I include a lot of public institutions, politicians, and behind the scenes figures who are difficult to nominate, but clearly having a huge influence in this confusion that reigns. So communication ethics is the study of communication, but this other word, ethics, which is a beautiful word, a word I struggled with when I was in my 20s. I was working in the media industries, particularly in advertising, which I'd considered in my teens as something artistic, as a creative exercise, which I kind of saw as bringing together a lot of techniques. But when I joined the advertising industry, I found it was really a profit-making business, which a very successful one, which didn't really consider people as life beings, as considered their well-being. It really was selling products, which has a function, of course, in mass-mediated consumer societies. But this question of ethics kept on coming up. How do we apply ethics? What is ethics? What are ethics? How do they make sense if we consider words like truth and trust and friendship and justice and equality and kindness and goodness? It's a beautiful set of words, and I have got one of the classification tables that I use is the positive ethics. There's also the negative ethics, and they're equally or opposite in their effect, which is really very deeply negative. And in some ways, I think our world is being driven by these negative ethics of hate, of greed, of fear, of anxiety, of arrogance, and many other negative behaviors. But that again goes back to the question, what is ethics? What are ethics? And I trawled through the literature over many years of looking into how ethics are used, why they're used, and what they are. And actually, it's very simple when it comes down to it. But it's been obscured by this massive wave of disinformation, the informationalism, the information construct that we're now living in, is actually burying a lot of good things as well as obscuring some of the bad things too. So ethics actually is the process we each undertake every day, every second of our waking and even our sleeping lives, where we value the world. And so if your friend comes into the room with a bad haircut, you might joke or make comment because you've essentially made a valuation of an ethical judgment about their hair. Their hair may be the very latest trend, a wonderful new innovation in hair design. But in your mind, your valuation is that it's a terrible haircut. Now, the dispute that arises can be quite considerable. Imagine things more serious than haircuts, but also on a mass scale. So 2 points of view, both of which are judged essentially by values. So your values may be determined by having very conservative inclination towards haircuts. Your friends may be a very progressive inclination towards haircuts. And these are both values. There are sets of values. There can be hundreds of values involved in one judgment. But these values are moving also. So we change our values. We change our minds, it's called. But in fact, our minds are a biochemical, amazing biochemical, neuroscientific studies, which are difficult to determine. We don't see inside the brain. What we're trying to do now, the highest level of neurosciences are trying to construct models, but they're only just beginning of the human mind and its capabilities. And in fact, it's a fascinating area because the human mind appears to be far more powerful and complex than we've ever imagined. But going back to ethics, we hold these judgments, we move these judgments, we change these judgments, these values. And each of us produces our own values, depending on whether we're angry or sad, that whether we woke up happy or grim that morning. Each day, we apply our values and we change them. Some in the right way, sometimes in the wrong way. But the values are subjective, and this is really the key. Each of us hold our own values. And when we meet somebody who shares our values, who has similar values, we recognize them. We feel something in common. But where they are different, where they hold different values, this world of values becomes a world of conflict. And really, this is what's happening in the media, mass-mediated value system, where information full of values and data is the raw side before the raw data of our sciences and methods produced by our experience is raw before we apply these values. And when it's formalized in information, these values are embedded too. And again, you can see this in the information age in our media, where one media source, one broadcaster will produce a completely different interpretation of events to another. And you wonder, people consider, how come they've both taken the same information and interpreted it in completely different ways? Well, media organizations aren't objective and scientific. They're commercial operations which have commercial objects. And these objects don't necessarily agree or cohere with actual reality. They are the basis of the operations of that company or that corporation. So values which we each produce, and we are subjective beings. And these values have to be brought out into the open and debated. And there's the confusion. There's where we're going through this fake news debate where nobody really understands what's going on because they don't have access to a means to explore and methodologically organize and evaluate values except from what they've seen and heard before. So communication ethics is a study of how personal values and social values both cohere and conflict, and how our entire world is based on these values. And ethics is the examination of values, and communication is the logic of interaction. So together, you get this very, very profound scientific, methodological grounding or standpoint, as we call it, for the valuation of all communication. So that was my first blog, my first vlog, and I want to just begin this process with something broad. And in future vlogs, I will endeavor to get more specific. We can look at particular news issues, but I'm really interested in the broad general principles because those are the things appear to me to be missing. Anyway, if you like this content, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll insert my Substack support mechanism in the blog below. Thank you, everybody. Cheerio.